Now it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Todd Snelgrove. Todd is founding partner of consultancy Experts in Value and former Global Vice President of Value for SKF. For over a decade, he's helped companies create, calculate, communicate, and get paid for value created. Todd is a noted subject matter expert, academic, and practitioner who has led the cultural change to realize the value of buying and selling based on quantified value. His recent best-selling book, Value First, Then Price, shows the roadmap of how companies can profit from the right value strategy consisting of tools, processes, skills, marketing, and business models that allow both buyers and sellers to become more profitable. So with that, Todd, welcome.
Thank you, Taylor, and thank you, Leverage Point, for putting this together today. I assume most of our attendees are here because they realized they need to quantify the value they bring to their customers so that they're not discussing lowest price that meets the minimum criteria. So a strategy has been decided for somewhere within the organization and says, this is what we're going to do. But over the years, what I've realized is, just because it's a strategy doesn't mean the whole organization is going to implement it. How do you get adoption of a strategy that's very important for an organization if they want to get paid for value? So, that's what I wanted to cover today about some best practices that I see in the marketplace of companies that have really driven this forward, and hopefully take away with some clear takeaways. So, I'm just going to mention the book here because I think there's a really neat diagram, I guess you'd call it, in the chapter, one of the chapters. And Jim Anderson, a professor that I do a lot of work with, kind of said, the same thing. Companies want to do this, but how come they don't get the value from doing it or the success? And as you can see, kind of broke it down into two components: the ability to sell value, the tools and techniques, and then the want, the ongoing plan to make it happen. And, so on the left-hand side, it starts with your value conceptualization of new products. Have you tied your value strategy into your new product development process? I mean, are you building things that customers are willing and able to pay for? And I've seen too many customers or companies in different markets get to the market and say, look at this. And then they find the customers aren't willing to pay. I'm just going to say double for it because they don't perceive the value. So within the value process, are you quantifying what would this be worth to the customer? Then you know what you can price for it. Is it tied into your value selling process? I mean, proactive, engaging with clients, saying, here's what the value we can bring, where we can bring it, what it would be worth? Or is it a tick-the-box activity at the end of the day? Hopefully most of you have some sort of a CRM system, but sometimes companies are like, okay, we're at the point in the sales funnel to quantify value. It becomes an activity versus a cultural ongoing thing. So it needs to be tied into all the different stages of the process. Do you have a tool? I mean, the tool is extremely important. It's got to be easy to use. It's got to look right. The math has to be correct. And believe it or not, I've seen some that don't have the math correct in them. But do you have a tool you can use to say, if you do this, this is the impact that we think we can have, where in your business, and what that financially would be worth it to you? And then have you done some initial training, some face-to-face cultural training? I mean, with the tool, some of that can be web-based. Click here, add customer name here. The formula for energy is this. But to really get the sales team to say, I feel comfortable with this. I feel confident. I've got the words I can use to have that discussion. I've role-played this before. If they're technical in whatever industry you're in, maybe learning some of the financial things that will be in the tool are very important so they have that confidence. So that's kind of the kickstart, the year one. That's great, but what's happening ongoing? Is it constantly happening with the training? An example that somebody uses is, sports athletes, even the best in the business that are in whatever sport, they constantly practice. They constantly read, they constantly learn. It's not a one and done. You're never going to be an expert in anything if it's static engagement. So, constantly tying that into your quarterly sales meetings, the role playing. I have one company I know that has one person read a book for every quarter and then present the snippets of it. Again, when you read something, it's amazing how you adapt it and internalize it. Sales compensation. I won't name specific companies, but one CEO said, I want my team to do this. How come they don't? And I said, okay, how do you measure, reward, and motivate your sales team? Well, selling. What do you mean by selling? Well, the more they sell, the more they make. Well, nowhere in there does that mean not discounting. And for publicly traded companies, which, whatever, I mean, a 10% net is huge. A 15% is amazing. 5% is a third of the profit gone. And salespeople can be very creative in finding ways to discount, some of it being price, but terms, conditions, free services, etc. So you're really saying, sell, hit your target, but don't do it by discounting. Deliver that value, negotiate for that value, and then reward your team for doing it. Something that I've spent a lot more time in the last few years is value buying options. I've been lucky enough to do some work on the procurement side, not just selling on value, but buying on value. And if a sales organization is, in front of me saying how great they are, then I say, okay, are you willing to get paid based on delivering that? And, maybe it's a risk reward, maybe there's something around that. But if you say no, anybody can make a PowerPoint slide that says how great they are. That doesn't mean that people will always take it. If you price it a certain way, they won't want it. I mean, maybe you're in the consultancy business or the sales business, and you say, okay, if I help your sales team increase the margin or the profit, I want a part of that. And then someone's going to look and say, well, I'm not writing you a check for $25 million for a 2-day sales course. Okay, but by you saying you'd be willing to take that, you must believe kind of in your model and methodology to be able to take some of the risk. So spend some time here, and we won't go through it today, but different pricing options. And it doesn't need to be the extreme, the 100% pay for performance. A lot of work that I've done is around, okay, fine, we're more expensive price-wise, but we'll guarantee some value along the way. Less risk on both sides. Business culture. I was very lucky. The CEO that I worked for numerous years was like, we've got to deliver value. We've got to do that. That's how we're going to differentiate. But, he made it clear. He talked about it. It was in part of our annual report. He really believed it. And then customer culture. How do customers perceive what you do? Are you out there with the white papers at the conferences, doing those things that get people to stop and think, wait, I never looked at it that way. That's interesting. Wait a minute. Maybe I should review how I think of insert a product or service in there. But, not just always during the sales process, but evangelizing the difference well in advance. So some value propositions. I start off making sure people that are using in their market material, their communications with clients, and their discussions is that people are using the right terms. Is your value, the lowest price? No. But, price and cost are two different terms, and I'm amazed at how often people transpose these. People assume if they pay a lower price, that means a lower cost. That is an assumption. Grab your accountants, and we're talking hard measurable cost savings, not cost avoidances, not a free training that the customer wasn't going to pay for, but, lower cost, it means more profit. And do you want to guarantee lower cost being profit, or do you want to hope lower price? And value is on the upside. I think it's one of those words that gets overused all the time in different cultures, and might be, depending on where you are in the world, value might be in the lowest price brand. But value can be increased revenue, reduce risk. All these things can be quantified. And I would say whoever's got the greatest profit over time that's sustainable, that's what matters. So we're really driving that message home and equipping the sales force with the understanding when the customer says, I need a lower price, and not to sound arrogant. To say, do you mean a lower price or a lower cost? Because I can work on you on implementing this I use the example, less energy. But, and funny enough, a lot of procurement people say, well, that's what I meant. Well, minor changes in the meaning make a big difference. I'm going to use an example I've used for a decade, and it's going to be an industrial example, but this works in a product or service, capital expense versus not. You have two widgets. There's always at least two options, whatever you're buying, whether it's a shirt, a computer, or a car. And let's just say there's a $10 one, and then there's a $15 one. And they meet the same specification. They met the same ISO specification. They look the same. They smell the same. And the customer's got a choice now, and they say, okay, wait a minute. Why would I pay 50% more for the one on the right? Because from a price perspective, it doesn't make sense. And in the old days, I mean, I've been around for a while, I guess now, but the sales team, the technical team would go in and explain why. And this is different for every industry, whether, again, product or service, but this one will use more or less of that than the other one. And it might be the product has been designed differently, but a lot of these things can be because of the implementation, the knowledge that your sales force brings around what they're doing. Yes, I mean, maybe you need to do this less, or maybe you need to install it this way, or maybe you should use less of this. But if I was talking to another technical person or the user of the product or service and I said less or more, they would probably understand what that meant. Maybe not an exact number, but they would nod. Less down, that means something to me. I get it. I wouldn't need to get into real depth. But as the rise of the economic buyers happened, those words don't mean anything to them. They're sitting in an office in New York City. They don't care about these things. They don't live and breathe and have those problems or benefits. So it's incumbent upon the sales force to put some numbers there. Based on reasonable expectations, we believe the one on the left, and I'll explain TPA. It's an evolution of total cost of ownership, but on the left is 87 and the one's 57. And the different impact of profit is $30, the difference between the two of them here. Now, if I was a salesperson in front of a client and I did this, and I always put myself in the buyer's perspective, if I got to this point of the discussion, they could ask me, why would that happen? How will it happen? Where has that happened before? What's the probability it will happen? How will we measure if it does happen? What happens if it? These are all closing questions. I mean, then you have to have a process, a tool, a methodology, but okay. And again, I'm asking somebody to pay $5 more for a $30 payback. That's an investment for them. They only need to be 1/6 right to pay it back. It's not just a price premium, and that's a term that I just throw quickly for anybody that has marketing responsibility. I would suggest, I should never say never, but I was at a procurement conference and I accidentally used the term premium brand, the Cadillac brand for the North Americans maybe, but procurement made it very clear, premium is a negative word in their mindset. Premium to them, and I'm generalizing, connotates paying more for nothing tangible, for a logo. What's a logo mean to me? What's your head office mean to me? This is an ROI investment payback discussion, so they feel much more comfortable. I don't mind paying more because there's something there, not just, a logo. So I mentioned earlier this concept, this evolution of total cost of ownership. So TCO, depends which academic, but late 70s, early 80s, very big in the IT world as people were starting to put in these big servers and the like, big capital investments. And the question was, okay, what's the payback? Less mistakes, less people, quicker turnaround, et cetera, et cetera. And, I kind of looked at that model and said, how do I evolve that? And this can be involved to any industry, product, or service. I'm going to go through a quick industrial because that's my background, but I'll give you some examples just to think of it in different worlds afterwards. But I would always talk about total cost of ownership, and it was this professor, Jim Anderson, he goes, well, the way you explain it, you're saying, yes, it's the cost in use, the product or service, but you're also talking about the benefit, the value added, the up time. Total cost of ownership only measures one part of the balance sheet, cost reductions. People care about profit impacts. Profit impacts come two ways. Cost, yes, but also upside things. Revenue, these things, they're not technically being calculated by total cost of ownership. And the comment was also, Todd, if you keep using the same term as everybody else uses, they'll make some assumptions. So I'm going to walk you through an example, big industrial. So you make a plane, you make a car, you make a motor, or a computer, it doesn't matter. Somebody's going to design and manufacture a product. And those engineers, God love them, they're great, but they can make that machine last forever. If there was no trade-offs, they'd make it in titanium steel, whatever they would do. But they're being told the market's willing to pay X amount for this, whatever you're building. Let's work backwards. This is what they care about. So they make design trade-offs. But the things that are underlying during the design process of a machine, a lot of times they're not looking at what differentiation can I add to my machine that would be of value to the customer, and therefore I could sell more volume or at a higher price. You'll see as we go through, but most of the costs occur in the operation phase. What if you made a machine that used less energy, less water, less lubricant, was faster, which needed less repair, whatever that is? If I'm selling for one of these big companies, now I can go to the marketplace saying, yes, my machine's X% more, but you're going to save Y, which is much more when you use it. So somebody builds a product or service, then they sell it to somebody. This is the acquisition phase. And the term, just to throw it there, is that some companies will say, Todd, we already buy in total cost of ownership. We don't need to see your model. We have our own model. Perfect. Let's see your model. Let's see my model. But what I found is a lot of people globally use the term total cost of ownership What they're really talking about is total cost of acquisition. Big difference. And I'm not saying it's not important, but this is the commercial aspect of the buying something. So the price of the product or service, what's the minimum order quantity? Who pays the shipping? Is there any special taxes? Can I return stuff that I don't use? I mean, et cetera, et cetera. This is important, but we'll get to some data in a minute. And you can see that it's not the biggest part. So just because your clients are maybe using the term total cost of ownership doesn't mean they're measuring it in a full life cycle. So that's a great question. How do you measure it? Here's how we measure it. So somebody built it. Procurement gets involved to buy it. They bought 1,000 cars, 1,000 dump trucks, whatever they bought. They're not using them in general. People within their organization are using them. And here these machines, whatever, laptops, they get installed, operated, and maintained. So how much water, how much energy, how much operational cost? How long will it last? You know, when I repair it, how much does it cost to be fixed? The one example, and I'm not sure it translates great around the world, but some companies might sell you a machine at the lowest unit price with the strategies are going to make it all up with parts afterwards or service afterwards, especially if you can't substitute something else in or because of the contract you have to buy from them. These are things you should look at. I mean, okay. Or are you going to include that with the machine? I need to look at these costs. Production, quality, and amounts, yield, total cost, and probably the people on the phone, we've been creative. We found a way to calculate it in total cost, but it's not a cost reduction when you increase somebody's revenue. You could argue it's lower cost per ton produced, but I'm going to increase your revenue, sellable value, the quality, the scrap will be reduced. So these things are quantifiable during the operations phase. And then you get to disposal, which for most of us, there's no cost there. However, in some industries, it's very big that people don't look at. In my old world, in the industrial world, the industrial lubricant companies, and it's a rule of thumb, said that the average cost to dispose of used oil or grease is 2.5 times the price to buy it. I mean, you have to pay somebody to come take it away. You have to store it. It needs to be cleaned and refurbished, or before it's sent somewhere. Well, if I would have known that, maybe I would have designed a machine that didn't have to have that, or had the right amount of it, that there wasn't a bunch of excess. When you're back at the office, I mean, you can walk through this real quickly. I mean, if you're buying a car, there's the acquisition phase. You can see the price of the car and the financing and the delivery cost, but it's the operational cost. Yes, the fuel, the miles per gallon, kilometers per liter, but the insurance, the average cost to repair, the depreciation. There's some websites that actually have this information, and disposal there is called resale value. It's actually very important. So in the medical business, it's being called the total cost of care for patients, just to give you an example. In the renewable energy, it's called levelized cost of energy. So adaptations of this to all industries, product or services. One of my favorite pieces of research, this is, I'm going to say, I think it's 15 years old now, but it's close enough, I mean, mathematically to still be valid. So Accenture, big global consulting organization, and I've seen a few other ones do similar data, different examples, but it holds true. They look at the 4 different segments, we'll call them. So commercial aircraft, Airbus is an example, Boeing. Class 8 trucks are big 18-wheelers, Volvo, Scania, International Truck is an example, the big ones you see on the highway. Industrial equipment, fans, gearboxes, pumps, machines, and light-duty pickup trucks, but this is for people that use them for work, which, not personal use. But you can see the initial purchase price is the red bar at the bottom. It ranges from 8% to 12%. And the OPEX cost, and we're not looking at depreciation or disposal here, is between 88 and 92%. Can you believe that when you buy a plane for $1 million or 10, whatever the number is, that represents only 8%? Labor, repair, maintenance is where the big numbers are. And of course, fuel. I mean, when the fuel spikes were very high a bunch of years ago, a lot of the big global airlines actually took planes that were less efficient and said, we can't afford to fly them. Industrial equipment. I mean, you're buying a machine, and what I found a lot of companies to do, they would look at that 12%. That was very important. What do I really need? What am I willing to pay for? And, maybe we can do a bunch of negotiation strategies to get that machine, a group of machines, 10% cheaper. And the question I ask is it better to get that machine 10% cheaper, or pay 10% more, but get it to be 2% more efficient. And I'm using efficient for that yellow bar. Real quickly, 10% of 12 is 1.2, and that 2% of the 88 is 1.76, about 50% bigger. So 10 is bigger than 2, but in this case, 2 is more important. And you need to have the denominator to make the calculation. There's a bunch of research on the internet. Do some Google scholarly reviews. I mean, it's amazing. Customers aren't looking at the right numbers, but I'd say that it's our fault as sales and marketing people. We don't give it to them. So from a product strategy perspective, I think most companies have gotten better at trying to explain the value they bring, talking about the features of the products or service, and then getting into the benefits. It's faster, quicker, lasts longer, easier to use. It's a service. I'll come in and make you better. I'll come in and help you increase this. I'll come in and help reduce your risk. So the benefits we're getting better at, but taking that next step to put a number to it. And it's our job to put the number to it, not the customers. This is all we sell for a living in general, this type of product or service. That buyer might have numerous things they need to buy. Sorry. They can't be an expert in everything they buy. They need some data and information from us. So, you know, it's a simple exercise, and it was kind of, you know, there's something called the 5 whys, but I just kept asking this question, so what? And a non-technical person in a technical industry, I kept saying, why does it matter? So what? It's more reliable. What does that mean? And it's important to know how you do it, but what's that worth? It's a neat word, but I don't understand it. I can't visualize it. So I kept asking this question, so what? And then you were able to put some numbers to it. So I'm going to give you an example. I just think it's funny. But SKF, the company I was with for a bunch of years, built an energy efficient bearing. It's going to use less energy. Bearings reduce friction. So whatever, 8-10 years in development, lots of money, big launch. You got an executive meeting, and they spent most of the time discussing how they did it. Very important, because the technical people are going to challenge. How are you able to get this improvement? Okay, this is great. The last 5 minutes of the presentation, they got to the customer benefits, and they said, okay, even though we've done this and this to it, it's going to last as long as the other one, and it's going to have less, and it's going to run cooler. So a room of 80 people, I think, ish, and everybody's nodding. I've been in the industry almost 20 years, 15 years, and I looked at a colleague and I said, why does it matter about the temperature of the bearing? And he laughed. He goes, everybody knows that. You know, and I said, well, I don't. And I'm not an engineer, but something to the effect of there's a correlation between the lubricant temperature and its life. If it runs 1 degree cooler, the temperature or the lubricant life is doubled. Something like that. I can't remember exactly. I'm like, well, why do you say that? The benefit is longer lubricant life, which is less lubricant, which is I spend less money on lubricant, buying it and disposing of it. That's pretty easy to quantify, actually. And it's nice because it comes out of the same budget. Don't make your customer do the work to get to what the value of runs cooler is, or more reliable, as an example. So every company on here is at different stages. I just happen to know some of these groups. So, you know, they have a tool. They've worked to build it. So you can see, you know, the Caterpillar. You guys know who these people are. Leverage Point, this is what they do for a living. You know, and I think it's interesting, 20 years ago, there wasn't a tool. So it started on an Excel spreadsheet, then it went to this, to that. But, you know, the tool you have to have, but it's about implementing the tool is where the value occurs for you and the client. So the tool just isn't an ROI analysis, but over time, when you start saving your cases in there, it'll help you find where value will be. I can go in and search, you know, what's the top 10 things we've done for this industry? Or maybe I've done it for the same customer in a different part of the world. So it becomes a repository. Then I can go in and start measuring, we think this would be worth X for you. I remember your clients, well, where do you think that? Oh, I've done it 847 times. Here's the min, here's the max, here's the average. Wow. Again, depends the width of what you're offering, but, you know, they've got only so much bandwidth. You know, let's prioritize what we can do to help at different facilities do different things. Again, products or services. So it's not, you know, the tool is the cornerstone of it, but it helps you do all these other things. So you're coming in and saying, over a period of time, holistically, we're going to take cost out, increase profit, and here's how we're going to do it. this is a slide or this conference was, a bunch of years ago, but it was one of my favorite sayings, and everybody's reading it right now, but I will read it. This lady is now in charge of the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply, UK-based, European-based procurement. But I mean, it's not our job to figure out what your value is. If you can't bring me the information, I don't have the time or energy to do it. I will focus on what I can measure and what I can see. And I hate to, price, in general, price is what it's going to be. So every time I hear a company say we can't measure value, I'm not trying to make it sound flippantly easy, but it's maybe not as hard as you think you are if you go through some exercises, that life cycle, that so what question, again, services also, but this is what our job is. And we spend the money building the product, we spend the money doing the research and development. We need to do the last step, which is the marketing material, the information to enable the customer to pay for that value. So, now culturally, I mean, are you giving your sales force the tools and techniques? They've got a tool to show the value. The CEO has said to do it, but I mean, do you really have all the examples to go out and get the customer to think differently? If you're dealing with a procurement person that's bought on, I'm just going to say price for 20 years, they're not just going to change tomorrow. You're going to have to find a way to engage them to think differently. So one thing that I've always done is to try to explain, what's better, a price savings that, a customer leverages to get a price savings on whatever they're doing, or an annual total profit added improvement. And a long time ago, I was having a discussion with a customer, and he said, Todd, they're both 10%. Why is your 10% better than the other 10%? I said, my 10% is much better. And he goes, I disagree. His I can see, his I can measure, his hits the bank at the end of the year. And I said, okay, let's make some assumptions. My competitor's offer will be a contract, I'm just going to say for 5 years. So he's going to give you a 10% discount on whatever it is for 5 years. And in both scenarios, there'll be inflation, but we'll take that out because it would be for either one of us. And what's important is my improvements I make, that the value that's extracted from the product will become sustainable. Again, value doesn't come in a product. The potential of the value comes in the product, but the value gets realized when it's used. So again, services, how do I use this? How did I install this thing? How do I operate it? That's when the value gets extracted. So once you teach somebody how to use something properly or do it better, let's assume they've learned that skill. And for argument's sake, Mr. Customer, I'll assume the competitive offer becomes cash. Nothing bad happens. So kind of a best case scenario for the price option. So year one, price reduction, somehow he's leveraged this option. And again, energy, downtime, water, hours of time I spend on the phone calling IT for support, the life, whatever it is. I mean, that's what your organization needs to work on. And he goes, okay, at the end of year one, I'm no better off, but 10% is better than maybe 10%. I said, no, it's not. If I don't hit the 10%, I'll make you whole. Okay, so now both 10% are sounding pretty solid. And I said, well, what's other interesting is when I'm saving you energy, just as an example, the minimum I'm saving you is 10%. I can't stop the machine from saving you more energy. My salespeople, my engineers, when they're in there, they can only exceed the 10%. The price, the person's not going to wake up and go, you want to know what? I was only going to give you 10, but here's 15 because I like you. So at one point, you've capped what you're going to get, and at my point, you have a minimum. And he thought that was an interesting discussion. I said, well, what happens year two? I'm going to work on reducing inventory, consolidating inventory, scrap inventory, getting rid of, whatever that is. My competitor's offer is not a 10% price reduction per year. They'd be out of business. They're publicly traded. Go look at their profitability. So again, make the machines last longer, reduced energy, reduced OPEX cost, etc. It turns out that a 10% price reduction is worth 10%. A 10% annual profit improvement, cost and or revenue, is worth 2.6 times more, 26%. In this example, on $1 million buy, it's worth $800,000 more over the 5 years. Basically a year for free over 5 years. It's not a pretty slide, but I've used this at a lot of procurement conferences, and I do get one question. What happens when the supplier runs out of ideas? Well, I mean, again, we have to manage our value for customers. We have to keep creating new ones. We have to help them implement it and replicate it. But again, if we don't have that value that's different, then price will be the focus. Summarizing this, I mean, the information to kind of challenge And Leverage Point will have these slides available for you after the call. I won't go through detail, but I mean, MAPI is a North American industrial organization. One of my favorite pieces of research. Companies that buy on total profit added, not just cost reduction, that are publicly traded in 2014 were 35% more profitable. How you buy, Mr. Customer, is going to have a huge impact on your company's profitability. Procurement doesn't want to buy 3 bids in the lowest price. They want to buy best value for the company, but it's our job to help them do it. One of the white papers, it's that orange one there. It's a book. It's based on a decade now almost of research, but it's based on the 2009 Nobel Economic Prize winner, how both sides can work together to take cost or whatever out and be more profitable. So I won't go through all these, but you get the idea. There's a bunch of research in the marketplace now from procurement people saying the same thing. So it's not just a sales pitch, it's procurement saying, okay, we've got to think differently. Value pricing. I mean, when you come to the market, just saying to your sales force, this is the price. Why? Well, that's what it cost us. I mean, again, what it cost us to build, it's important to know, but how am I going to get our sales force confident and comfortable to go and do this? So when you're building new products and services, and again, the value will be different by country, by industry, you know, by labor cost, etc. But I can run a bunch of algorithms and say, we think this service or product is worth around. So one person will be 18, one will be 15, one will be 12. But you're going to get a scatter plot around where the areas of impact are. You know, then you look at your cost. If your cost exceeds the value, stop. Either you got to find a way to get your cost way down, or you got to find a way to increase the value. But that's the time and place to make that decision. In this case, there's a magnitude of difference, and I believe this is how Leverage Point started, was to help companies with their new product pricing and service pricing. But they said, this is what it'd be worth to the customer. So we have a difference here in magnitude. The price should be set somewhere in between. If you extract all the value, the customer has no incentive. The difference between what you sell it for and the value they get, I'm not sure if I have the term in here, it's called the value surplus. And the closer it is to that number, the 15, to what they pay, the less surplus they get, the more they're going to look around. So there's kind of got to be some ratios to look at. It's different for, in numerous industries, it's different, but the harder the value and the quicker the value, the more you can charge for it. I mean, energy, water, lubrication, ink for a printer, it's pretty measurable. It's this year and it's measurable. You can charge a higher percentage of that than something over 10 years that's not as guaranteed you're going to be able to get less for. Maybe in the Q&A section we can have more of a discussion there. And then, you know, you can increase your prices as long as you're increasing the value to the customer. So again, it could be worth $15 to Mr. Customer, but if you did this or changed that, it could actually be worth 18. So if you increase the value to them and then your price increases are less than that, the total value created is greater. So I talked before about different, you know, cultural ways to get people. I mean, again, we say we're better, we're measuring we're better, but when the customer says, you know, you won't get paid that way, we say no, it might be more difficult. I think as CAT, there's numerous companies that have this. And just as an example here, so the example on the right is, I'm going to call it 100% pay for performance, the outsourcing deal. I mean, if there happens to be any IT outsourcing companies, what was your total spend in IT last year? We'll do it for less. Plus, we'll put some KPIs in there on service or whatever it is. So it's like, okay, you want to know what? Maybe they can do it better than we can. That's a big change for a lot of companies. They're not going to wake up one day and say, we're getting rid of all that of what we do. But it's one option. I had mentioned before, kind of a hybrid option. You know, a guaranteed annual, the 10% was an example. But okay, you need to agree on, you know, how we'll calculate it. This is the tool we use. You know, it'd be great to agree upon the numbers we'll use in the tool. Because there's no point of going in and doing a bunch of work on something at the end of the year. They say, we don't care about energy. I mean, I doubt that, but just for argument's sake. Or we think energy is 1 cent a kilowatt. At the same time, don't spend all your time trying to get to the 6th decimal point. I mean, Google it and you'll get energies around 12 cents. And there's a demand charge and some other things, but it's more about the relative difference. Every month that's spent trying to go over the contract is 1 month people aren't out saving the money. It's kind of the other point that I make. And a quote, you know, it's something to take back to your management team, and I just love it, is, you know, how many ways do you have to discount? It's a Friday. It's a competitive industry. It's whatever. It's a new market I don't care what the program is called, but if you have ways to offer customers discount for whatever reason, why don't you have ways to guarantee the value? And the last point I'll make there is a lot of times it's not near as much risk as people think. I'm just going to make an example. Say you were going to sell it at $100, but you'd be willing to do a discount if they gave you more volume or a longer contract and brought it down to 90. Okay, well, if I guarantee you it's $100, but I guarantee you 10% value every year, and if not, I write you a check, the worst case is what we were going to be at anyways. Yes, your people are going to have to do maybe some more work, but you do this for the bigger clients, not only your key accounts or strategic accounts, but the bigger ones where you're going to have the team in there doing work anyways. So it's not near as much risk as it might sound. How do you tie this into the sales process? I'm stealing a slide here. This is from a gentleman I do a lot of work with, Rob McGuire, Scottish gentleman, lives in England, basically. But we were at a conference once. It was a sales group we were doing some work together with. And I think we were doing a session at London Business School tied into this. And he just got up from the board and started drawing this. And my favorite part of this, well, there's a few things. But one is, how many times have sales consultants or managers told us how we should sell? Here's the funnel. That's maybe how we want to sell. How are they buying? Because I think you engage customers differently where they are in the buying process. And I'm going to use an example just because it's personal to all of us, and you're going to have to think afterwards how this applies to you. But you're going to buy a car, okay? Just because everybody at one point has got a car, okay? A need's been identified. You're sitting at home, the other car breaks. Your kids become older. You have a baby, whatever it is. A need's been identified. I need a car, okay? And then you sit at home, and because of your past experiences, because of your assumptions, you'll make some specifications. And I'm not saying these assumptions are right or your specifications are right, but for argument's sake, I decided I want a gas car that's 4 doors. So Maserati's out, Tesla's out, but here's 26 other brands that are in, from GM, Volkswagen. You get the idea. Okay, so these kind of meet the minimum specification. And then honestly, you want to know, for whatever reason, my past experience, from my friends, whatever it is, maybe 3 people meet that criteria, and I believe they could actually, I'd be interested in driving one of their cars. Okay. Then I go meet or send out the RFP, RFQ, RFI, and this is where sales and marketing on the phone, you get the interest from the customer. You do a lot of work. Whoa, do we do a lot of work? And we submit our bid, our products, our services, our extra value added we're going to do. And then, 2 or 3 of you are negotiated with, the terms, the conditions, the guarantees, these types of things. 1 or 2 people have chosen. The assets are bought. There's been an agreed upon 3-year contract, whatever it is. And hopefully they're measuring, did, the supplier do what they said they were going to do? And, really look at this slide afterwards, because I think you could apply this to any industry. His point was your ability to change what I'm buying and how I think dramatically changes over time. If you're talking to me before I'm in the buying process, you can get me to think differently. You're right. You want to know what? Diesel might be interesting, or electric might be interesting, or maybe I don't need cars. Maybe I should just Uber everybody. I don't know, but that's the time that my mind is the most open to have a discussion. So, again, everyone's got different value selling processes, but if the first time you've met the customers in the RFP, RFQ stage, and it looks like, they've already, again, if it's too late to be going in and going, no, you should be measuring total value. You should be quantifying this. You should be looking at that. Don't get me wrong. I've got those phone calls a lot of times, come in and save that, but it's much different. Now, I'm not saying you don't quantify now. I'm saying now you need to probably challenge the customer more because they've got some existing assumptions. I don't mean threatening them. I don't mean going in and saying, you realize, we could save you $1 million over here. If they're earlier in the buying process, what are we doing? We're writing white papers. We're going to conferences. We're saying, you want to know what? Maybe next time I buy office supplies, I should think differently because I saw this person from whatever company talk about this. Wow, that was interesting. So how much of our marketing and sales time are we spending way up front of the funnel, and how much are we just reacting and following? And side comment here, I'm not going to name a name, but one big technology company, if it gets to the RFQ stage and they don't have a prior engagement with the client, 90% of the time they won't bid. The costs are too high. They're only being used as a bid to push somebody else down. And they said, you want to know what? Our success rate is so bad there. So think of where the customer is in the buying process, of how you tie in your selling process, but also what type of value you're going to show them. So the needs identification, here's 27 examples, think differently. Wow, I never thought of it that way. Maybe I should choose differently. In the RFQ stage, you might need to be a little more in the face, poignant examples. In the sales process, and I'm getting to a point here where, get to the end here, is where everybody needs to be doing this, not just somebody at head office. There needs to be somebody driving it, but two sales processes that I kind of use as examples. To keep a customer happy or to sell something. So, scenario, and who cares what dollars or euros or currency is, but you've got a relationship with a customer somewhere in the world, and they're buying $1 million from you in products or services, and you've had a 5-year agreement with them, and they love you, you're the greatest people ever, and thank you, thank you, thank you. New procurement person comes in, contract comes up for bid, whatever reason, contract has to go out for bid, even legally. And you're in there talking about all the stuff you've done. In the old days, before you had a CRM system, this is when that nasty email would come out. By Friday, I need everybody's activity they've ever done for insert customer name. Now, hopefully you have a system, somebody can go in and pull, these are the things we did, whatever you've done of value. That's what you got to figure out. Maybe you didn't quantify it. Maybe you've got a system to go in and quantify it now. But what we found is a lot of times is competitors will come in and say, I'll do what they did and they'll do it cheaper. So the question I ask is, if I'm a procurement person, let's put myself in that situation, would I switch? Now, maybe you as a supplier come in and you've got your tool, whatever tool you've got, and you come in and say, yeah, but we've done all this value for you and it's worth this much. And I sit there and I smile and I say, okay, you've shown me you can deliver value. You've quantified that value. I'm happy about this. Your $176,000 is better than the 100. But I think it's important to realize the customer is not buying what you've already given them in the past. They're willing to pay for something they haven't got. So to be able to go in with your tool and say the same thing, over the last 5 years, we've done this, it's worth this, but we've got 9 ideas. There's 3 of them that we're really close to actually starting a project on. Based on our reasonable assumptions, we think they're worth $300,000 to your operation over the next 2 years. I've created a risk for the customer. If they leave me, my ideas walk out the door. Again, the product's how I get paid maybe, but the ideas are where the value realization occurs. I've created something. Too often, I look at most people's presentations, they spend 90% of the time talking about what they did, not the future of what they're going to do. And I was just laughing to myself because I think I have a visual here. This is an old advertisement for Accenture, but it's Tiger Woods, the golfer, saying, what I really care about is what you're going to do, not what you've done. You need what you've done to show the credibility. Don't get me wrong, but a good challenge to your sales presentations is, are we going to talk about the future or are we going to talk about the past? So I think I can bring you this value. Okay, so that's kind of more the big key account, we'll call it, the big strategic account, the big large account. But how do you use the value quantification to sell a solution, a widget that's better, product or service? And again, most technical people I see, they come in and they say, I see an opportunity. Your existing situation is X, whatever that is. Your efficiency is Y, whatever that is. And I'm going to come in and tell you what's wrong and why and how you can be better. And then I'm going to tell you, you need to give me this much money to make that happen. So, okay, you go to a customer, you do a benchmarking survey, you walk the facility, I don't know. And you say, well, it's obvious this system's not talking to that system, there's a waste, whatever it is. Then you give them the solution. So this is what you need to do. What I find is most customers respond with, neat, that's fun stuff, but I can't afford it. It's not in the budget. Does somebody else do it cheaper? They come back to one of your channel partners maybe and ask those questions. All I'm suggesting is that in the sales process, you use value quantification is to say, if you were to go from X to Y, 2 years to 3 years, whatever it is, that would generate $81,000 of cash. I'm asking you to pay the $18,000. You see the words change to investment versus cost. But the sales process just should start with opportunity identified. Then we go to the customer and say, this is what it would be worth for you financially to make that better, whatever that is. And now here's how we're going to do it. Maybe not give them the whole how, because they might cherry pick you. But again, this is why everybody in the sales force should be using tools, having case studies to pull from so they can customize to have this discussion. Again, we can talk technical all we want, but dollars and cents is the term that resonates. and I mentioned this a few times, I mean, it's important to have a CRM system. But I was asked a question once by a client, and they had invested a lot in a CRM system, and I knew the person well enough so I could make a cheekish remark. I said, a CRM system by itself is worthless. And he goes, what do you mean? All it talks about is the activity you've done for a client. And I had come from a meeting earlier where the client said, we had a beautiful CRM system, and that's great, you've done a lot of stuff, but what was that worth? You need to quantify what the activity was in the CRM system, but the value quantification in and of itself, people are going to want to know some details behind it. You know, if you walk into a customer and say, I saved you $1 million, when, where, why? So the two systems need to go together. They don't need to be attached. They don't need to be in the same system. But if someone says, you know, we've already invested in a CRM system at whatever company you work for, this goes with it. It's not a conflict to it. It supports it. So finally, the culture change stuff. This is, it comes from the pharmaceutical industry, but I think it's applicable everywhere. And what I really loved about the person that put this together is, you know, it looked holistically and says, you know, to really get people to think differently, they've got to go through an evolution. The kickoff sales meeting might be great. The executive CEO meeting, that's awesome as a start. But do they understand why we're doing it? Is it a flavor of the month? What's in it for them? Is this good? Can we really do it? Is it an ongoing implementation? Are we measuring it? Are we adopting it? Is it becoming part of our culture as a company? Take a look at this slide also when you look at this afterwards, because again, the scatter approach of, okay, we launched it. Why isn't everybody using it? I yelled at them to use it. Okay, that's not going to change the getting the real value from it. I love this, you know, procurement's not going to wake up one day and say, oh, we should pay more money. It's our job to give them the information to think differently. So we need to seed it early. We need to be engaging early. We need to challenge their thinking to say, okay, why does this make better business sense? I mean, one thing, this is from a LinkedIn piece of research, but, you know, once you've got the tool, whoever's driving that for your organization, again, they're driving it, doesn't mean they're the only person using it. If you do it properly, there's a lot of research that says customers will give you value for that. If you're the leader in your industry and you've got some different thoughts in your industry, they're willing to give you the second look at a bid. All things being equal, they're willing to pay you more because you're the leader. You've got the newest ideas. You're out front. So again, being that thought leader does bring value. You've got the tool, but again, having that whole space around it. Again, this is a long slide, but it's a summation slide that kind of says what's in it for your company for doing it. Again, you've invested in a tool, maybe you've done some training, but you know, Monitor, which is now part of Deloitte, said companies that do this well, take a value strategy, or publicly traded, are 24% more profitable than the average. Funny enough, they're 36% more profitable than the people that take the make it up in volume approach. Increasing closing rates, less discounting, less market churn. Again, different industries all over the place, but good pieces of research. You know, over my 20 years in industry, I mean, you can see academics done a lot of work, not just on the sell side, Kellogg Marketing, it's an American school, but London Business School on value pricing, Assad, University of Tennessee on procuring on value. So there's been a lot of academic. The procurement associations in the second column have actually had me come do a keynote at their sessions everywhere in the world. So I leave this in case people say, well, that's a North American example, or that's only valid in Europe. Government procurement is number one there, NIGP. PASIA was Asia, IBE Corp was Brazil. Just to give you a flavor, governments are changing how they buy. 3 bids that meet the minimum criteria. You know, no, we want best value. We measure value with these different measurements, operational cost, life, etc. And we're going to contract this way. And some of the smarter consultants are finally getting out there saying, we need to think differently. Yes, you need to know where your suppliers are, you need to know what you're buying, but now that you've got that, how do we actually implement value into the contract? So what to do and what not to do, you know, what works. Yeah, like everything, it's a culture change program. It's got to be driven from the top. The odds are, I mean, your CEO probably knows about it, is funding it, whatever, but for them really to internalize it, I got lucky. He got stuck sitting through a few global meetings with me on stage. I don't think I would have got the time in front of him for him just to listen, but after the session, he was like, wow, again, and really bought into it, really, really did. You got to have a full-time person. Okay, I don't care what you call the person or where they live, probably head office helps, but you need someone to drive the program, to update the program, to be the, the ongoing lifeblood of it. But you also need somebody within the regions or the business units. The story used to be Todd showed up in Asia, got everybody excited. Todd left. You can't change culture in a 10-day trip. There's, somebody that you support. Another interesting comment that was made is those people should be in the business units. And, not who do they report to, but if they're in the business units, they're in that management team every week. They're not just being dropped in once in a while. Because value is part of pricing, who you're hiring, your channel to market, what your marketing strategy, it's part of everything. So it's better to have them part of the Asia business team management and be supported by the people on the phone, whoever's driving your program, then them report to you and be seen as an outsider in that region. Again, that'd be different by country or company, I guess. Your process, how are you going to implement this? You've got a value tool, but how are you going to identify the opportunities? How are we going to measure them? How are we going to prioritize them? I mean, that's great. The tools, what they get excited about, but what do we do next? The tool's got to have some meat to it. I mean, I've seen a bunch of them that are really just cost avoidances. They're an online calculator that has 3 lines on it. If I can reduce your energy by 10%, it would save you this. Okay, that's interesting, but, show me the how, when, where. Give me something. You don't have to get it all away, but, I mean, make sure the tool's got some meat to it. And the visualization of that is important also. The messaging. I mean, are you talking how you're the value leader, how you demonstrate value, how you quantify value, how you contract on value? I mean, how you're the value engineering, value service, value whatever company. If it's just off on the side, it's got to be who you are. If you sell through channels to the marketplace, they've got to see what's in it for them. How does my supplier that's got all this value stuff help me sell more, differentiate more, get paid more? They can be resistant. Why are they going to do more work just to shuffle a supplier around? So get them on board to it. Over time, have the data. If you remember the Accenture slide, again, I've got a deck of hundreds of slides from examples all over the place, but having some third-party data. I like the third-party versus internal stuff. Internal stuff's great, but wow, that makes people think differently. Having some meat there to have that discussion. I've suggested, sometimes people take the value quantification to their best customers. If they already love you, great. Start doing it. It'll keep them so they don't leave and you go, what happened? But if you're losing a big customer that's an opportunity for you and they're buying on price somewhere else, going in and saying, I'm better, I'm better, I'm better, is probably, you're going to have to change the whole discussion. Again, going in and saying, let's talk about total cost, we'll guarantee it, put your competitor on the back pedal. The tool should have some sort of stage gate stepstone process to it, not just at the end. Mr. Customer, here's my proposal for you to implement this system, the CRM, whatever system it is. They've bought it, it becomes accepted, and then what actually happened? And you should have that ongoing customer. How are we doing? How can we implement better? How can we change? Not just afterwards. One of my favorite things, actually I stole this from the procurement gentleman I mentioned earlier, is, Shark Tank, your presentations. Bringing in colleagues that present to each other all the time or have the same background, you're not going to get new insights, but have that procurement person, have that third party, have that CEO once in a while to challenge and say, what do you mean by that? What's that worth? Your formula, why does that number come from? You only get confident when you practice. I've been lucky, but doing it so long, I don't want to say I've got every answer, but variations of the questions I've heard before. Your team, if they're going to be out there and doing it, they've got to get confident to do it. And there should be a value board, not just you, but have a senior vice president of sales sit on it, have a marketing person sitting on it, instead of you chasing them every year saying, hey, look what we're doing, hey, can you help me? Have some senior people have to come in once a year, twice a year to see what's happening. Here's what we did to the tool, but here's what else we're doing and how we need your help, what doesn't work. Focusing on the activity. It's something you could measure. Everybody has to use the tool 6 times. Well, you'll find a lot of cost avoidances. You'll find a lot of, not great stuff. There's the carrot and the stick kind of example that says, how do we, really drive behavior change and reward behavior change? But, number of cases that are after the fact for cost avoidances are actually going to make your tool look junky, and the customers will notice it. So one company I know actually has a validation process where cases get reviewed by subject matter experts and they get ratings against them, and certain ones I wouldn't say get kicked out, but they get kind of pushed to the back so that they're not the ones you're out showing to customers all the time. Because guess what? Anybody could give something away for free. So the cost avoidances. The miscommunication message to sales. I remember one of my greatest meetings we were at when the CEO said, we've got to be strong enough to walk away from bad business. You can't tell them on the Monday, get every order, we need to load the book for the quarter or whatever it is. Hey, sell value and get paid for it. At some point, there's going to be a trade-off. They're not mutually exclusive, but there's got to be a clear message of, which way you want to go. I think I mentioned this enough earlier. I mean, hoping they're going to pay you after you give all the value is probably not the long-term strategy. One idea to prove you've got something might be worth it. The test program might be worth it, but be willing to contract before you give the prize away. The one expert sitting in head office. Somebody needs to be the expert. The 1-800 number, I need help, or can we role play this, or what do you think, or why? By region, by country, by company. But they're not the person that's driving the program all the time. They're using it. I used to say, I don't create value. It's the people in the field that extract the value with the implementation. I help coach them. I help support them. But, having one person, yes, but that can't be the only thing. And so finally, I think, again, hopefully you see how I've kind of tried to cover all these things in different degrees. But I think it's something to think about. The tool is where you start. It's a great start because you've got something. But that's not the end. So, price will be the discussion if the value is not demonstrated. If it's quantified, there's a much higher percentage chance that people will appreciate it. And, my last comment as we go into Q&A or Taylor finishes up is, budgets are made to be moved. One of my favorite quotes is, so if a customer ever says they don't have the money, that means your business case isn't good enough. Because they will reallocate money from somebody else. If your business case is that good, they'll go borrow the money. If it's hard, measurable, believable. So, it takes some work, but it's well worth it. So do the work. The book's a good read. I mean, I think because it's got 10 examples of it. I also like that there's 4 examples from procurement people saying, how do you engage me this way? So hopefully you take the time to grab it, give it a quick read, and any feedback's always appreciated. Taylor, I'm going to let you run. I think you do slides first before we do Q&A. But my hands are off the screen, and I'll let you keep going.
Yeah, thanks, Todd. We've had a few questions come in already, but there's still time to enter your question into the panel on your screen. So if you have any questions for Todd and you're willing to stick around for another 10 minutes or so, feel free to type them in there. And if you have to head out, we will be giving out the webinar recording, so you can catch the Q&A at that point in time. But just to give you a little bit more time to enter your questions, just a few words on leverage point. All right. Forrester Research states the first vendor to succeed in communicating a vision to value to executives wins the business 74% of the time. So how can you guarantee that you'll be that vendor? Well, your sales team needs to bring their approach into the 21st century, meaning it must be value-focused, customer-centric, and digital. The traditional sales approach was created to educate a buyer, but today's buyers are more educated than ever, spending more than 60% of their buying process researching online before even talking to a rep. So do away with the standard corporate overview, the long PowerPoint presentation, extensive questioning, and features and benefits review. Instead, create a crisp digital presentation that highlights what you're actually going to deliver to that customer qualitatively, quantitatively, and financially. Present data that can be revised so the prospect can visualize financial results, and leave behind a unique presentation that's tailored to them. So where do you start with that? Well, the answer is case studies. Old school sales and marketing reps have generated a plethora of amazing content that our buyers want to read, but it's static and frequently gets lost in the shuffle. Case studies are a prime example. They very clearly give you a crisp background and challenge that gets straight into solutions and financial results. Buyers download them from your site, ask for them after a sales call, and make buying decisions based off the financial results displayed. So why are salespeople only using them as a leave behind? Why are we leaving behind something that gets to the point fast and proves your value and convinces a buyer to buy? Well, maybe it's because they're not digital, but now they can be. Embedding this information into your sales presentation is the only way to be the first vendor to communicate a vision to value. And remember, according to Forrester, that vendor wins the business 74% of the time. So I took some screenshots from our interactive sales presentation tool to give you an example. This is a digital presentation. Everything you see can be customized live for the prospect. This is a fictional example where we embedded an existing static case study into the presentation. To start, we framed the customer's challenge. After providing industry insights, we jump into the solutions that were provided to a similar customer within a case study: business productivity improvements, risk mitigation, IT infrastructure cost savings, and IT staff productivity benefits. We then get straight to financial results, quantifying the value that was delivered from each solution. Again, all of this is customizable. Although the information came from a case study for a customer similar to the prospect on the line, you may find that the prospect wants to change a few numbers to better match their company. With a digital presentation, all of that is doable, then and there, recalculating the total value delivered and creating a presentation completely unique to the prospect on the line. So if you found any of that interesting, we'd love to have you enter into a raffle we're doing every month during these webinars, where we will digitally transform one of your case studies free of charge. Check the corresponding box in the exit survey upon leaving today's webinar, or email casestudies@leveragepoint.com. Okay, so that's it for my spiel. First and foremost, yes, this webinar is recorded and the slides and recording will be emailed to you within 2 business days. So Todd, let's get started. So this all makes a lot of sense. The value transformation, value selling, value strategies makes so much sense, but why aren't people actually doing it?
That's a good question. I think it does take some work. But again, hopefully I gave you some statistics to show the payback is going to be just amazing. So, taking that time to do the work. And the one thing, what I hear from some people, we need to hit a quarterly number. Yes, we're publicly traded companies, but, not that I'm an investment expert, but you want to have sustainable competitive advantage. That's what this is. So, it's going to help take your company for the next 100 years to be differentiated, to be the value person, get paid for that value. And, I was lucky, but a lot of investor days I was on stage because that's what's like, this is different. How can you charge more than your competitors? Because we do this better than our competitors. Here's how and why. So kind of getting it elevated to that versus, a project of the quarter, the silver bullet approach, I think makes a big difference.
Absolutely. So in your experience, in successful organization, who actually quantifies the value?
The experts, the people that are doing the value solution. So when you're launching a new product, the product expert, they've loaded the case in the system. So I've got, as a salesperson, somewhere to start. The people that deliver the value should be the ones quantifying it. Doesn't mean they shouldn't be a 1-800 number to call and say, I'm having a problem, I don't understand, what does this mean? I kind of did a lot of that. There was people around the world that would support that, but the person that's closest to the customer will have the most opportunity to get it done right and to get the right information in there. And also it should be done with the customer, sitting beside the customer saying, if X occurs, then Y occurs, and that means this, and everyone's nodding as it goes along, sending a static thing afterwards that they're going to try to explain, in front of the customer. They need to know what those numbers are and why they're there and how they got calculated. So they need to take ownership of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So here's a two-part one for you. What's the right way to have conversations about value split between the seller and the buyer? And what do you think is a good starting point for a percentage?
I think there's a few things in there. First, I would say the harder the value is and the quicker it's going to happen, the higher percentage the supplier can take. Again, the energy savings, the water savings, these are measurable and quick. So I think you can ask for a higher percentage of that. And over the next 20 years, we're going to help this happen. That's longer term. There's so many variables of what that would be worth, so you're going to get less there. But an interesting, and I'm really close to the number here, but at Sade, one of the schools, there's a professor, Marco Bertini, told us the research that I think he's done or was involved with, one of the two, says that if you ask as a supplier for more than, it was something like 76.2%. But I'm very, very close, within 1%. If you ask for more than that, the customer won't take it. And the example was, even people, if you find $100 on the road, you and your friend are walking, it's a free $100. This value we're talking about is new value. It's free. It's extra. If one party tries to take more than 76% of it, the other one says, you want to know what, it's not even worth my time. I prefer you don't get 76 versus me get a free 24%. I think it's reasonable to start with the 50-50, again, depending on the risk reward. The more risk you're taking, of course, the more reward. And that's when you find companies saying, you want to know what, I'm going to pay you some money up front because I can't afford, if you hit this out of the park, which I think you could do, I'm not writing that check. So again, where that timing is. And finally, I found it much easier to get paid up front and then give something back if you don't hit. It's much tougher to go to the client at the end. I've hit all my KPIs, write me a check for $1 million of extra profit. Where does that come from? How do we write a check that way? Where's the processes and systems? Pay me my list price as we do this. If I exceed my target, give me more share next year, extend the contract, allow me to put a price increase through. There's other ways to get paid for than just a performance check. But if you wait to the very end, they will get very creative in ways that they don't want to pay. So get paid earlier. The harder it is, the more it can be split. 50 is a place to start. And again, it also depends on your unique competitive advantages. Again, if it was energy, and I'm not an energy person, but if I came in and said, change all your motors to this thing, thank you very much. There's probably another supplier that has those types of motors that's not going to ask for 50%. So, are you the person that can deliver it versus other people also will make a difference.
Really interesting. All right, last question for you. My company sells services rather than differentiated products. What are some of the variations when quantifying value for services rather than products?
That's a good question. Again, sorry with the timing, my fault, but services where the value gets extracted. A car, a computer, but computer is a good example. By itself doesn't do anything until you know how to use it, when to use it, why to use it. You probably have to do some benchmarking. So where are you, Mr. Customer? Say you're selling services and marketing service, sales, or whatever it is. Okay, what's the average success rate? What's the average take up? Okay, fine. Maybe we'll put some fee at risk if we do better than that. If we get you to market quicker, if the adoption's higher than we expect, there's some reward there. You might need to, agree on what you're going to measure now, but the measurement will come as it happens, if that makes sense, as it's realized. So you can assume I can get you to market quicker. You can assume you'll help them sell more or something like that. But the calculations exist. If somebody wants to send me an email on that on the side, I can give you more specifics.
Great. All right. Well, that looks like that is it for us for today. Just one reminder before you guys go, register for next month's webinar. During the exit survey, Ed Arnold, Leverage Point's VP of Product, is back to discuss common missteps product managers make and how to avoid them. But thank you all for taking the time to join us today, and a special thank you for all of you that stuck with us over the 12 p.m. deadline. Thank you for joining us, and a special thank you to Todd for your insights. From all of us here at Leverage Point, have a wonderful rest of your week. Take care.